The eclipse dawn trembled as another volley of enemy fire struck its shields. Alarms screamed throughout the ship, and sparks flew from damaged consoles. Ethan gripped the edge of his command chair, his jaw clenched tight. The enemy fleet had them cornered, their weapons trained on the human vessel like predators closing in on prey. On the main screen, the massive alien ships loomed ominously, their sleek designs glinting under the dim light of a distant star. They're hailing. "Use again," said Grace, her voice tense as she worked frantically at her station. "Same message. Surrender the child or face destruction." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, searching for any way out of this impossible situation. He glanced toward the door leading to his quarters, where Leora was hidden. She wasn't safe here, not anymore. Whoever these attackers were, they clearly knew about her, and they weren't going to stop until they had her. But how? How could anyone know about an alien baby found months ago on a derelict ship? "We can't fight them off," muttered one of the crew members, his voice shaking. "Their firepower is too strong." Ethan ignored him. Panic wouldn't help now. Instead, he turned to Grace. "How much time do we have before our shields collapse?" 10 minutes, maybe less," she replied grimly. "And even if we try to jump to hyperspace, they'll catch us before we get far." Ethan nodded, his expression hardening. "Then we don't run. We distract them." Grace looked at him sharply. "What are you thinking?" "We split up," Ethan explained quickly. "I'll take Leora and head for the escape pods. You stay here with the rest of the crew and hold them off long enough for me to get away." "No," Grace snapped, stepping closer to him. "You're not leaving us behind. We stick together, that's what we've always done." "This isn't just about us," Ethan shot back, his voice low but firm. "If they catch her, none of us will survive anyway. This is the only chance we've got." Grace hesitated, her eyes filled with conflict. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "All right, but promise me you'll come back for us." "I promise," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Himself, minutes later, Ethan slipped into his quarters, where Leora sat quietly playing with a glowing orb. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, sensing the tension in the air. He knelt down beside her and gently picked her up, cradling her close. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered, trying to sound calm despite the chaos outside. "We're going on a little adventure." Leora cooed softly and wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. No matter what happened, he would protect her. That was his promise, not just to Grace, but to himself. With Leora secured in a makeshift carrier strapped to his chest, Ethan made his way through the ship's narrow corridors. The lights flickered overhead as explosions rocked the hull, sending debris tumbling across the floor. Crew members scrambled past him, some shouting orders, others simply running for cover. Each step felt heavier than the last, but Ethan pushed forward, determined to reach the escape pod's dot when he finally arrived. He found 2 other soldiers waiting there, volunteers, who had agreed to help him escape. Together, they launched 3 pods in quick succession, hoping to confuse the enemy fleet. As Ethan's pod detached from the eclipse dawn, he watched through the small window as the ship shrank behind him, still under heavy fire. His heart ached for the crew he'd left behind, but he forced himself to focus on the task ahead. Hours passed as the pod drifted silently through space. Leora slept peacefully in her carrier, seemingly unaffected by the danger they were in. Ethan, however, couldn't relax. Every shadow outside the window made him tense. Every faint sound sent his pulse racing. He knew they weren't safe, yet not by a long shot. Finally, the pod sensors detected a nearby planet, a barren, rocky world with no signs of intelligent life. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Using the pod's limited controls, Ethan guided it toward the surface and landed in a shallow crater surrounded by jagged cliffs. Once inside the relative safety of the cave system, Ethan set up a temporary shelter using supplies from the pod. As night fell over the desolate landscape, he sat by a small fire, staring into the flames. Leora lay curled up beside him, her soft breathing the only sound in the cavern. For the first time since fleeing the eclipse dawn, Ethan allowed himself to think about what had happened and what might happen next. Who were those attackers? Why did they want Leora so badly? And most importantly, where could they possibly go from here? As if sensing his unease, Leora stirred and reached out to touch his hand. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, and, for a brief moment, Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through him, a comforting presence that seemed to say everything would be all right, but deep down, he knew better. They were being hunted, and sooner or later, their pursuers would find them. Until then, all they could do was wait and prepare. Days turned into weeks as Ethan and Leora adapted to life on the harsh planet. Food was scarce, and water even scarcer. But they managed to survive thanks to Leora's growing abilities. She could sense moisture beneath the ground, guiding Ethan to hidden reservoirs, and her telekinetic powers proved invaluable when gathering supplies. Despite the challenges, Ethan found himself marveling at her resilience and her potential. One evening, as they sat together under a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations, Ethan noticed something odd. Leora was staring intently at a cluster of stars, her eyes glowing brighter than usual. Slowly, she raised her hand, pointing at one particular star. "What is it, sweetheart?" Ethan asked softly. "Do you recognize it?" Leora didn't answer, of course, but her gaze remained fixed on the star. Something about her expression told Ethan that it was more important than anything else. They'd encountered so far. The next morning, Ethan packed up their camp and prepared to leave. He didn't know where they were headed, but he trusted Leora's instincts. If that star meant something to her, then it was worth investigating. As they climbed back into the escape pod, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just running anymore, they were searching for answers, for allies, and perhaps even for a home. Little did he know, the journey ahead would lead them straight into the heart of a mystery centuries in the making. And Leora's role in it was far greater than either of them could have imagined. Months passed, and life aboard the Eclipse Dawn settled into a strange new rhythm. The war still raged on, but for Captain Ethan Carter, every day began and ended with one priority: Leora. The alien baby had grown rapidly, her shimmering skin now glowing faintly even in the dim light of the ship. She was no longer the fragile creature Ethan had found on that abandoned vessel. Instead, she was becoming something extraordinary. Leora's presence had sparked mixed reactions among the Parisians. Crew. Some soldiers avoided her entirely, uneasy about having an alien aboard. Others were curious, sneaking peeks at her whenever they thought Ethan wasn't looking. But there was one person who stood by Ethan without hesitation: Lieutenant Grace Miller. From the moment they brought Leora back to the ship, Grace had been a constant source of support. Whether it was helping to figure out what Leora needed or simply offering advice when Ethan felt overwhelmed, Grace became more than just a trusted officer. She became family. "She's getting stronger," Grace remarked one evening as she watched Leora crawl across the floor of Ethan's quarters. The little girl giggled as she reached for a floating holographic star Ethan had projected for her amusement. "Do you think it's normal for her kind to develop this fast?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, leaning against the wall. He crossed his arms and studied Leora thoughtfully. "But I've noticed things that make me wonder if she's different." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "She doesn't just react to things like a regular baby would. Sometimes it feels like she knows exactly what's going on. Like she understands us." Grace frowned slightly, but said nothing. They both knew that raising an alien child came with risks, especially since none of them truly understood her origins. Still, watching Leora grow brought moments of joy that were rare in their line of work. For Ethan, those small victories meant everything. As time went on, Leora continued to surprise everyone. By the time she was 6 months old, at least according to human measurements, she could already walk and mimic simple words. Her favorite word quickly became Ethan, which always made Grace chuckle. But it wasn't just her intelligence that set her apart. One day, while playing with a metal ball Ethan had given her, Leora accidentally dropped it. Before it hit the ground, the ball stopped midair. Hovering inches above the floor, Ethan froze, staring at the scene in disbelief. "Did you see that?" he asked Grace, who stood nearby. Grace blinked, equally stunned. "Yeah, I saw it." "Do you think she did that?" Leora clapped her hands excitedly, oblivious to the shock she had caused. When Ethan cautiously approached her, she smiled up at him innocently, as if nothing unusual had happened. From that moment on, similar incidents became more frequent. Objects moved when she waved her hands, lights flickered when she laughed. And once, during a particularly stressful mission briefing, the entire ship's systems rebooted spontaneously, all while Leora sat happily chewing on a toy. The crew couldn't ignore these events forever. Rumors spread faster than ever, and soon, whispers of the alien prodigy echoed through the halls of the eclipsed dawn. While some marveled at Leora's abilities, others grew suspicious. A few senior officers demanded that Ethan hand her over to scientists for study, arguing that her powers could be weaponized. Ethan refused outright, angering many but earning respect from those who believed in doing the right thing. One night, after another long argument with Command, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his quarters. Leora lay asleep in her makeshift crib, her soft breathing the only sound in the room. He stared at her, wondering if he had made a mistake keeping her. Was he being selfish? Should he have let someone else take responsibility for her? These questions haunted him, but deep down, he knew the answer. No matter what happened, he couldn't abandon her. She trusted him, depended on him, and somehow she had become his reason to keep fighting. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Grace, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan and sat down beside him. Neither spoke for a while, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. "You're doing the right thing," Grace said finally, breaking the quiet. "Not everyone agrees with you, but I do," Ethan sighed. "I just wish I knew. Why she's here? Why me? Why us?" Grace shrugged. "Maybe it's not about knowing why. Maybe it's about what happens next." Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after she left. What did happen next? He didn't have answers, but he resolved to face whatever challenges came their way dashed together. By the time Leora turned 1, she had developed a bond not just with Ethan, but with several members of the crew. Grace often joined Ethan in caring for her, teaching her games and songs. Even some of the skeptics warmed up to her, finding it hard to resist her cheerful demeanor. Still, tensions remained high. The galaxy was dangerous, and Leora's growing abilities made her a target. One fateful morning, disaster struck. An alarm blared throughout the ship, startling everyone awake. Ethan rushed to the bridge, leaving Leora in Grace's care. On screen, a massive fleet of unknown ships loomed ominously close. Their weapons were charged, ready to fire. Panic swept through the crew as realization dawned. They were surrounded. "Who are they?" Ethan demanded, gripping the edge of the console tightly. "We don't know," replied the communications officer. "They're transmitting a message, but it's encrypted." Before anyone could act, a single transmission broke through. A deep, mechanical voice filled the room. "Surrender the child, or your vessel will be destroyed." Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't after supplies or technology. They wanted Leora. His mind raced. How had they found her? And why? "We can't give her up," Grace whispered, urgently when Ethan returned to his quarters. She held Leora protectively, the little girl clinging to her shirt. "I know," Ethan said grimly. "We'll find a way out of this. We always do." But as the enemy fleet closed in, Ethan realized that protecting Leora wouldn't be easy. Whoever or whatever was coming for her, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. And, for the first time, Ethan wondered if he was truly prepared to face what lay ahead. Little did he know, Leora's journey was only beginning, and so was his. Months passed, and life aboard the Eclipse Dawn settled into a strange new rhythm. The war still raged on, but for Captain Ethan Carter, every day began and ended with one priority: Leora. The alien baby had grown rapidly, her shimmering skin now glowing faintly even in the dim light of the ship. She was no longer the fragile creature Ethan had found on that abandoned vessel. Instead, she was becoming something extraordinary. Leora's presence had sparked mixed reactions among the crew. Some soldiers avoided her entirely, uneasy about having an alien aboard. Others were curious, sneaking peeks at her whenever they thought Ethan wasn't looking. But there was one person who stood by Ethan without hesitation: Lieutenant Grace Miller. From the moment they brought Leora back to the ship, Grace had been a constant source of support. Whether it was helping to figure out what Leora needed, or simply offering advice when Ethan felt overwhelmed, Grace became more than just a trusted officer. She became family. "She's getting stronger," Grace remarked one evening as she watched Leora crawl across the floor of Ethan's quarters. The little girl giggled as she reached for a floating holographic star Ethan had projected for her amusement. "Do you think it's normal for her kind to develop this fast?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, leaning against the wall. He crossed his arms and studied Leora thoughtfully. "But I've noticed things that make me wonder if she's different." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "She doesn't just react to things like a regular baby would. Sometimes it feels like she knows exactly what's going on. Like she understands us." Grace frowned slightly, but said nothing. They both knew that raising an alien child came with risks, especially since none of them truly understood her origins. Still, watching Leora grow brought moments of joy that were rare in their line of work. For Ethan, those small victories meant everything. As time went on, Leora continued to surprise everyone. By the time she was 6 months old, at least according to human measurements, she could already walk and mimic simple words. Her favorite word quickly became even, which always made Grace chuckle. But it wasn't just her intelligence that set her apart. One day, while playing with a metal ball Ethan had given her, Leora accidentally dropped it. Before it hit the ground, the ball stopped midair, hovering inches above the floor. Ethan froze, staring at the scene in disbelief. "Did you see that?" he asked Grace, who stood nearby. Grace blinked, equally stunned. "Yeah, I saw it." "Do you think she did that?" Leora clapped her hands excitedly, oblivious to the shock she had caused. When Ethan cautiously approached her, she smiled up at him innocently, as if nothing unusual had happened. From that moment on, similar incidents became more frequent. Objects moved when she waved her hands, lights flickered when she laughed. And once, during a particularly stressful mission briefing, the entire ship's systems rebooted spontaneously, all while Leora sat happily chewing on a toy. The crew couldn't ignore these events forever. Rumors spread faster than ever, and soon, whispers of the alien prodigy echoed through the halls of the Eclipse Dawn. While some marveled at Leora's abilities, others grew suspicious. A few senior officers demanded that Ethan hand her over to scientists for study, arguing that her powers could be weaponized. Ethan refused outright, angering many but earning respect from those who believed in doing the right thing. One night, after another long argument with command, Ethan found himself sitting alone in his quarters. Leora lay asleep in her makeshift crib, her soft breathing the only sound in the room. He stared at her, wondering if he had made a mistake keeping her. Was he being selfish? Should he have let someone else take responsibility for her? These questions haunted him, but deep down he knew the answer. No matter what happened, he couldn't abandon her. She trusted him, depended on him, and somehow she had become his reason to keep fighting. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Grace, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan and sat down. Beside him, neither spoke for a while, the silence broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. You're doing the right thing, Grace said finally, breaking the quiet. Not everyone agrees with you, but I do, Ethan sighed. I just wish I knew. Why she's here? Why me? Why us? Grace shrugged. Maybe it's not about knowing why. Maybe it's about what happens next. Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after she left. What did happen next? He didn't have answers, but he resolved to face whatever challenges came their way. Dashed together. By the time Leora turned 1, she had developed a bond not just with Ethan, but with several members of the crew. Grace often joined Ethan in caring for her, teaching her games and songs. Even some of the skeptics warmed up to her, finding it hard to resist her cheerful demeanor. Still, tensions remained high. The galaxy was dangerous, and Leora's growing abilities made her a target. One fateful morning, disaster struck. An alarm blared throughout the ship, startling everyone awake. Ethan rushed to the bridge, leaving Leora in Grace's care. On screen, a massive fleet of unknown ships loomed ominously close. Their weapons were charged, ready to fire. Panic swept through the crew as realization dawned. They were surrounded. Who are they? Ethan demanded, gripping the edge of the console tightly. We don't know, replied the communications officer. They're transmitting a message, but it's encrypted. Before anyone could act, a single transmission broke through. A deep, mechanical voice filled the room. Surrender the child, or your vessel will be destroyed. Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't after supplies or technology. They wanted Leora. His mind raced. How had they found her? And why? We can't give her up, Grace whispered, urgently when Ethan returned to his quarters. She held Leora protectively, the little girl clinging to her shirt. I know, Ethan said grimly. We'll find a way out of this. We always do. But as the enemy fleet closed in, Ethan realized that protecting Leora wouldn't be easy. Whoever or whatever was coming for her, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. And, for the first time, Ethan wondered if he was truly prepared to face what lay ahead. Little did he know, Leora's journey was only beginning, and so was his. The stars outside the window of the eclipse dawn shimmered like tiny diamonds scattered across an endless black canvas. Inside the ship, Captain Ethan Carter stood in the dimly lit command center, staring at the holographic display hovering above the central console. The map showed their position deep in uncharted space, far from Earth and surrounded by hostile alien territories. His crew moved silently around him, their faces tense with exhaustion and fear. They had been fighting for hours, stuck in a brutal skirmish against an enemy fleet, whose weapons seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. He was tired of war, tired of loss, and tired of carrying the weight of so many lives on his shoulders. But he couldn't afford to show weakness now. Not here, not when they were outnumbered and outgunned. The battle raging outside wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting humanity's fragile foothold in this corner of the galaxy. If they failed, Earth would be next. Captain, called Lieutenant Grace Miller, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship's engines. She pointed at the monitor displaying their current situation. Their reinforcements are closing in. We can't hold them off much longer. Ethan nodded grimly. Then we need to find another way. His eyes scanned the readouts, searching for anything that might give them an edge. That's when he saw a derelict alien vessel drifting nearby. It looked abandoned, its hull scarred and battered, likely left behind after some forgotten conflict. To most, it would have seemed like nothing more than space junk. But Ethan saw opportunity. Set a course for that ship, he ordered. We'll board it and see if there's anything useful inside. Grace raised an eyebrow. You think scavenging is going to save us? It's better than sitting here waiting to die, Ethan replied firmly. Without waiting for further argument, he turned to address the rest of the crew. Gear up. We're going in. Minutes later, Ethan led a small team onto the alien ship. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dark, eerily silent interior. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, illuminating twisted metal corridors lined with strange symbols etched into the walls. The place smelled faintly of burnt circuitry and something else, something organic, that made Ethan's skin crawl. Still, they pressed forward, checking each room carefully for supplies or anything else that might help them survive. Dotted was in what appeared to be a medical bay that they found it at first glance. Ethan thought it was just another piece of debris, until he noticed the faint glow emanating from beneath a tattered blanket. Curious, he knelt down and gently pulled the fabric aside. What he saw took his breath away. Nestled among the wreckage was a baby, an alien baby. Its skin shimmered with a soft, iridescent hue, and its large, almond-shaped eyes blinked slowly as it stirred. Tiny fingers grasped weakly at the air, and a quiet gurgle escaped its lips. Despite its otherworldly appearance, there was no mistaking the innocence in its expression. It was alive, vulnerable, and utterly alone. "What is that?" whispered one of the soldiers, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, his heart pounding. He reached out cautiously, half expecting the creature to react violently. Instead, it cooed softly and nestled closer to his hand. A strange warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, not since before the war had taken everything from him. "We can't take it with us," said another soldier sharply. "It's not human. Who knows what kind of threat it could pose?" Ethan hesitated. Logically, the soldier was right. Bringing an unknown alien species aboard their ship was risky, possibly even suicidal. Yet, as he looked at the tiny being in front of him, he couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. It was too young, too defenseless. Leaving it here would mean certain death. "No," Ethan said finally, his tone leaving no room for debate. "We're taking it." The journey back to the Eclipse Dawn was tense, with the team exchanging uneasy glances as Ethan cradled the infant protectively in his arms. Once aboard, he ignored the stares and whispers of the crew and headed straight for the infirmary. There, he worked tirelessly to ensure the baby was safe and healthy, improvising care based on limited knowledge of alien biology. Miraculously, the child seemed resilient, adapting quickly to its new environment. Word of the alien baby spread quickly throughout the ship, sparking a mix of curiosity and hostility among the crew. Some viewed it as a potential weapon or spy, while others simply resented the distraction during such a critical mission. But despite the backlash, Ethan refused to back down. He named the baby Leora, a name he'd once read in an old book about celestial myths, and vowed to protect her no matter what. As days turned into weeks, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in himself. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond duty or obligation. Caring for Leora gave him hope, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, light could still exist. And though he didn't yet realize it, his decision to adopt the mysterious infant would set into motion events that would reshape the fate of the galaxy itself. For now, however, all Ethan knew was that he had made a promise to keep Leora safe, no matter the cost. The journey to Aurelia Prime was long and tense. The escape pod systems were old and unreliable, and Ethan spent most of the trip fixing one malfunction after another. Leora, now nearly 2 years old, sat quietly in her seat, watching him work with an expression that seemed almost thoughtful. Her abilities had grown stronger since their encounter with the bounty hunters, and Ethan often caught her moving objects around the cabin just for fun, or perhaps to test her limits. Despite the danger they were in, there were moments of quiet joy as he watched her explore her powers, but joy wasn't something Ethan could afford to dwell on. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the crew he'd left behind on the Eclipse Dawn. He wondered if Grace and the others had survived the attack. He owed them so much, his life, Leora's safety, and yet he was running again. The guilt weighed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside. For now, his priority was keeping Leora alive. When the pod finally entered the orbit of Aurelia Prime, Ethan leaned forward in his seat, staring at the planet below. It was breathtaking, a world of shimmering oceans, sprawling forests, and cities that gleamed like jewels under twin suns. But there was also something unsettling about it. The cities looked abandoned, their towering spires crumbling and overgrown with vines. Even from space, the planet felt haunted, as though its history lingered in every shadow. "This is your home," Ethan said softly, glancing at Leora. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on the view outside the window. Did she recognize it? Could she feel the pull of her ancestors' legacy? Ethan didn't know, but he hoped this place would give them answers and allies. The pod landed in a clearing near one of the ruined cities. As Ethan stepped out, he felt a strange energy in the air, like static electricity tingling against his skin. The ground beneath his feet sparkled faintly, as if infused with tiny fragments of crystal. Around them, the remnants of grand architecture rose like ghostly monuments, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with light. "Let's see what we can find," Ethan muttered, adjusting Leora's carrier on his back. They moved cautiously through the ruins, searching for any sign of life. Most buildings were empty, their interiors filled with dust and decay. But then they stumbled upon a massive structure that stood taller than the rest. Its entrance was marked by enormous golden doors engraved with symbols identical to the ones they'd seen on the mysterious planet. Ethan hesitated before pushing the doors open. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of something ancient and metallic. The room beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows. At the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a glowing orb. As they approached, the orb began to hum, projecting holographic images into the air. This time, the visions were clearer. They showed a proud civilization ruled by a family with extraordinary abilities. There were celebrations, battles, and moments of peace, all narrated by a deep, resonant voice. "The Valkyr dynasty," the voice intoned, "guardians of balance and unity across the stars." But the tone shifted abruptly. Images of betrayal and destruction followed. A man clad in dark armor appeared, his face twisted with rage. "K.O. Vorn," the voice growled, "traitor, usurper." Fire consumed the cities, and screams echoed through the hologram. Finally, the image of a young child appeared, a girl, wrapped in golden fabric, her features unmistakably similar to Leora's. "The heir survives," the voice concluded. "Find her, protect her, restore the dynasty." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was the proof he needed. Leora wasn't just a refugee. She was the last hope for a fallen empire. And K.O. Vorn, whoever he was, wouldn't stop until she was dead or under his control. As they left the building, Ethan noticed movement in the distance. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms humanoid but distinctly alien. They wore robes adorned with glowing runes, and their eyes shimmered with the same iridescence as Leora's skin. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand in greeting. "You've returned?" the figure said, its voice melodic and calm. "We have waited long for this day." Ethan instinctively placed himself between Leora and the strangers. "Who are you?" he demanded, his hand hovering near the blaster at his side. "We are the Keepers," the figure replied. "Guardians of the Valkyr legacy. We sensed the heir's presence when she entered our world." Ethan hesitated. These beings didn't seem hostile, but he couldn't afford to trust anyone blindly. "How do I know you're not working for K.O. Vorn?" The Keeper's expression softened. "K.O. Vorn seeks only power. We seek restoration for the dynasty and for the galaxy. If you doubt us, ask the child." Before Ethan could respond, Leora reached out toward the Keeper, her fingers glowing faintly. The Keeper smiled and knelt down, placing a hand gently on her forehead. A soft light passed between them, and Leora let out a contented sigh. "She trusts you," Ethan said reluctantly, lowering his guard. "What happens now?" The Keeper stood and gestured for them to follow. "Come with us. We will teach her who she is and prepare her for the trials ahead." Over the next several weeks, Ethan and Leora stayed with the Keepers in a hidden sanctuary deep within the ruins. The Keepers explained that Kale Vorn had once been a trusted advisor to the royal family but had turned against them out of greed and ambition. After seizing control, he hunted down every member of the dynasty, believing their bloodline held the key to ultimate power. Only Leora had escaped, smuggled away by loyalists before Vorn could find her. Leora trained daily, learning to control her abilities under the guidance of the Keepers. She could now lift heavy objects, create barriers of energy, and even heal minor wounds. Ethan watched her progress with pride, though he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Kale Vorn would come for them eventually, and when he did, they needed to be ready. One evening, as Ethan sat alone outside the sanctuary, a young keeper named Silas joined him. "You care for her deeply," Silas observed, sitting cross-legged beside him. "I promise to protect her," Ethan replied simply. "That means more than just keeping her alive." Silas nodded thoughtfully. "She carries great burdens, not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of hope. You must help her bear those burdens." "I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said firmly, "even if it costs me everything." Silas smiled faintly. "Then you are wiser than many who have walked this path before you." Their peaceful existence ended abruptly one night when alarms rang throughout the sanctuary. Kale Vorn's forces had found them. Dozens of armored soldiers descended upon the ruins, their weapons blazing. The Keepers fought valiantly, using their own powers to defend the sanctuary. But they were outnumbered. Ethan grabbed Leora and ran, dodging blasts and collapsing structures. Behind them, the Keepers chanted in unison, creating a massive barrier of light to hold back the attackers. But it wouldn't last long. "Leora," Ethan said urgently, stopping in a hidden alcove, "you need to use your powers. Can you make a shield? Something big enough to protect us?" Leora nodded, her eyes wide but determined. She raised her hands, and a dome of shimmering energy enveloped them, just as enemy fire rained down. The barrier held, but Ethan could see the strain on Leora's face. She was strong but not invincible. "We need to end this," Ethan whispered. Turning to face the chaos, he shouted, "Leora, focus all your energy into one blast. Hit them where it hurts." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a cry that echoed like thunder, Leora unleashed a wave of pure energy. The force obliterated the attacking forces, leaving only silence in its wake. When the dust settled, Ethan looked down at Leora, who sagged against him, exhausted. "You did it," he murmured, hugging her tightly. "You saved us." But as he surveyed the devastation around them, he knew this was only the beginning. Kale Vorn wouldn't stop not until Leora was either his puppet or his corpse. And Ethan realized that protecting her meant more than just fighting battles. It meant preparing her to face the greatest challenge of all, confronting the man who had destroyed her family. Together, they would rise or fall. The aftermath of the battle left the sanctuary in ruins. The once hidden refuge was now a scarred battlefield, its golden spires cracked and its walls scorched by blast of fire. Bodies of fallen keepers lay scattered among the debris, their glowing robes dim forever. Ethan knelt beside one of them, his hands trembling as he closed the keeper's unseeing eyes. These people had risked everything to protect Leora, and they had paid the ultimate price. Leora sat quietly nearby, her small frame slumped against a broken pillar. She looked pale, her usual shimmering glow dulled, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. The effort of unleashing such raw power had taken its toll on her. Ethan scooped her up gently, cradling her close. Her head lolled against his shoulder, but she managed a weak smile when she saw his worried face. "It's okay," she whispered faintly, her voice barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken real words, not just mimic sounds or expressed herself through gestures. Ethan froze for a moment, stunned. Then he hugged her tighter, tears welling up in his eyes. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "It's not okay. but it will be, I promise. In the days that followed, Ethan and Silas, the only surviving, Keeper worked tirelessly to salvage what they could from the wreckage. They gathered supplies, repaired damaged equipment, and prepared for the inevitable. K.O. Vorn would return. And when he did, they needed to be ready. Silas explained that Leora's abilities were tied to her emotions. When she was calm and focused, her powers were precise and controlled. But when fear or anger overwhelmed her, her energy became chaotic and destructive. To defeat Vorn, she would need more than raw strength. She would need discipline. Her how to fight, Silas urged Ethan. Not just with her powers, but with her mind. Show her that violence isn't always the answer. Ethan nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He was a soldier, trained to win wars, not raise a child destined to rule an empire. But he didn't have a choice. Leora depended on him, and he wouldn't let her down. Training began immediately. Each morning, Ethan and Leora ventured into the ruins, practicing exercises designed to sharpen her control. At first, it was simple, moving rocks, creating barriers, and healing minor cuts. But as her confidence grew, so did the complexity of the tasks. She learned to manipulate larger objects, channel bursts of energy into precise strikes, and even sensed the presence of others nearby. Ethan taught her combat techniques, too, showing her how to defend herself without relying solely on her powers. They sparred using wooden staffs, Leora's laughter echoing through the crumbling city as she dodged his clumsy swings. Though she was still young, her reflexes were lightning fast, and she often bested him with ease. "You're getting better," Ethan admitted one afternoon, rubbing a bruise on his arm where her staff had struck him. "But remember, fighting isn't about winning. It's about protecting what matters." Leora tilted her head, considering his words. "Like you protect me?" "Exactly," Ethan replied, ruffling her hair. "And one day you'll protect others too." As weeks turned into months, Leora grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She began asking questions about her past, piecing together fragments of memories triggered by the Keeper's teachings. Sometimes, these flashes of recollection brought her pain, forcing her to relive moments of loss and betrayal. Other times, they filled her with determination, reminding her of who she was meant to be. One evening, as they sat together under the twin suns of Aurelia Prime, Leora turned to Ethan with a serious expression. "Why does K.O. Vorn hate me?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, unsure how to explain such a complex enemy to a child. "He doesn't hate you," he said finally. "He's afraid of you, of what you represent. You're proof that his power isn't absolute, that there's still hope for the galaxy." "But why does he want to hurt me?" she pressed. "He thinks destroying you will make him stronger," Ethan explained. "But he's wrong. True strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Leora nodded slowly, absorbing his words. For a long moment, she was silent, staring at the horizon. Then she stood, brushing dirt off her clothes. "I'm not afraid of him," she declared firmly. "I'll stop him." Ethan smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's my girl." Their preparations reached a fever pitch when Silas intercepted a transmission confirming K.O. Vorn's next move. He was amassing a massive fleet, intent on wiping out any remaining traces of the Valcor dynasty, including Leora. Time was running out. "We can't stay here," Silas warned. "If we do, we'll be sitting ducks." "Then we take the fight to him," Ethan said decisively. "We hit him where it hurts, his stronghold." Silas frowned. "It's suicide." "His forces are too strong." "Maybe," Ethan conceded. "But if we don't try, we've already lost." After much debate, they agreed on a plan. Using the last of the Sanctuary's resources, they modified the escape pod to serve as both transport and weapon. Silas would remain behind to monitor communications and provide support, while Ethan and Leora confronted Vorn directly. On the eve of their departure, Silas approached Ethan privately. "You've done well by her," he said quietly. "Better than anyone could have hoped." I'm just trying to keep my promise, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion, to protect her. And you have, Silas assured him. But remember this, no matter what happens tomorrow, she trusts you. That bond is her greatest strength and yours. The journey to Vorn's stronghold was fraught with tension. The fortress loomed ahead like a dark monolith, its jagged spires piercing. The clouds. As they approached, alarms blared, and dozens of ships peeled away from the formation to intercept them. Hold on tight, Ethan muttered, gripping the controls. With a burst of speed, the pod darted between the attacking vessels, narrowly, avoiding blasts that lit up the sky. Liara clung to him, her eyes wide but determined, when they finally breached the fortress's defenses. Landing in a fiery crash within its central chamber, Ethan wasted no time. He grabbed Liara's hand and led her toward the source of Vorn's power, a towering artifact pulsating with dark energy. Kael Vorn emerged from the shadows, his armor gleaming menacingly in the dim light. His gaze locked onto Liara, and a cruel smile spread across his face. So, the little princess has come home, he sneered. How touching! Leave her alone, Ethan growled, stepping forward. Your fight is with me, Vorn laughed a cold, hollow sound. You think you can stand against me, against destiny itself? Before Ethan could respond, Liara stepped in front of him. Her voice rang out clear and steady. I'm not afraid of you. For a moment, Vorn faltered, surprise flickering across his face. Then his expression hardened. Brave words for someone so small. Without warning, he lunged at them, his blade crackling with dark energy. Ethan pushed Liara aside, drawing his own weapon to block the attack. Sparks flew as steel met steel, the clash echoing through the chamber. Liara, Ethan shouted over the din. Focus! Use your powers! Liara closed her eyes, drawing deep breaths. Slowly, the air around her began to shimmer. A wave of energy erupted from her body, knocking Vorn backward. He staggered, momentarily stunned, but quickly recovered. You can't win, he snarled, raising the artifact high. Black tendrils of energy shot toward Liara, wrapping around her limbs like chains. Pain seared through her, but she refused to give in. Summoning every ounce of strength, she channeled her energy into a single blinding beam. It struck the artifact, shattering it into pieces. The backlash sent Vorn sprawling, his armor cracking as the darkness dissolved. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with a final anguished cry, Vorn collapsed, his body disintegrating into ash. Ethan rushed to Liara's side, pulling her into a tight embrace. You did it, he whispered, his voice breaking. You saved us all. Tears streamed down Liara's face, but she smiled through them. We did it, she corrected softly. Together. As the fortress crumbled around them, Ethan knew their journey wasn't over. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel hope. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The fortress trembled violently as its foundations gave way, chunks of stone and metal raining down from above. Ethan grabbed Liara's hand tightly and sprinted toward the escape pod, dodging falling debris. The air was thick with dust and smoke, making it hard to see or breathe, but they pressed on, driven by sheer determination. Behind them, the remnants of Kael Vorn's stronghold collapsed into chaos, a fitting end to the tyrant who had sought to destroy everything Liara represented. When they finally reached the pod, Ethan practically shoved Liara inside before climbing. In himself, his hands moved quickly over the controls, initiating the launch sequence. With a deafening roar, the pod shot upward, narrowly avoiding being crushed by the collapsing structure. Through the small window, Ethan watched as the fortress disappeared beneath clouds of fire and ash. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They were safe for now, but exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them. Liara leaned against Ethan, her glowing skin dimmed to a faint shimmer. She looked up at him with tired eyes, and he smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You did good, he said, his voice hoarse but filled with pride. "You saved us all." Leora nodded weakly, her lips curling into a small smile. "We saved each other." Back on Aurelia Prime, Silas greeted them with relief etched across his face. He had been monitoring their progress anxiously, unsure if they would make it out alive. When the pod touched down, he rushed forward, helping Ethan carry Leora to safety. Despite her victory over Ko Vorn, she was still recovering from the immense effort it had taken to defeat him. "She needs rest," Silas said firmly, guiding them to a secluded area within the ruins where they could recuperate. "Her powers are extraordinary, but even she has limits." Ethan stayed by Leora's side as she slept, watching over her like a guardian angel. For so long, his life had been defined by war and loss. But now, looking at the child who had trusted him unconditionally, he realized that his purpose had changed. It wasn't just about protecting humanity anymore. It was about ensuring that Leora fulfilled her destiny. Over the next few days, news spread among the scattered remnants of the Valkyr dynasty. Survivors emerged from hiding drawn by whispers of the heir's triumph over Ko Vorn. They arrived cautiously at first, their faces lined with years of fear and hardship. But when they saw Leora alive, strong, and radiant, they fell to their knees in reverence. "She is the light we've waited for," one elder murmured, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "She will restore balance to the galaxy." At first, Leora seemed overwhelmed by the attention. She clung to Ethan, unsure how to respond to the adoration of those who hailed her as their savior. But slowly, she began to embrace her role. With Silas's guidance, she learned about the history of her people, their values, and their hopes for the future. And through it all, Ethan remained by her side, offering quiet support and unwavering loyalty. As weeks turned into months, Leora grew into her position as the leader of the Valkyr dynasty. Under her guidance, the survivors worked together to rebuild their shattered world. Cities once reduced to ruins began to rise again, their golden spires gleaming under the twin suns. Fields that had lain barren for centuries bloomed with life, tended by hands eager to reclaim their heritage. Hope returned to Aurelia Prime, and with it, a sense of unity that transcended species and borders. But Leora didn't forget the humans who had stood by her side. With Ethan's help, she forged alliances between Earth and the newly restored Empire. Trade routes reopened, knowledge was shared, and mutual respect replaced centuries of mistrust. For the first time in history, humans and aliens worked together as equals, united by a common goal. Peace. Ethan watched these changes unfold with a mixture of pride and awe. He had started this journey as a soldier fighting for survival, but he ended it as something more, a bridge between two worlds. Though he often thought of Grace and the cruelty eclipsed dawn, wondering if they had survived, he found solace in knowing that their sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Their bravery had paved the way for a brighter future. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ethan stood beside Leora on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt capital city. Below them, lights twinkled like stars and laughter echoed through the streets. It was a scene of peace and prosperity, a stark contrast to the war-torn galaxy they had once known. "Do you think they'd be proud?" Leora asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "Who?" "The people who helped us, the ones we lost along the way." Ethan smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know. They would be. You've done what no one else could. You brought hope back to the galaxy." Leora looked out at the city, her glowing eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "It's not just me," she said after a moment. "It's all of us. Together, we can build something better." Ethan nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "That's right, and I'll always be here to help you, to protect you." "I know," Leora replied, turning to look at him. "But maybe it's my turn to protect you too." Her words struck a chord deep within him. In that moment, Ethan realized that Leora wasn't just a child he had adopted. She was his equal, his partner in this grand adventure. Together, they had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger for a dot as night fell and the stars appeared overhead. Ethan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had spent most of his life running from battles, carrying the weight of guilt and loss, but now, standing beside Leora, he understood that true strength came not from winning wars, but from building bridges, from finding hope in the darkest corners of the universe. And as he gazed at the young ruler who had become his family, he knew one thing for certain: the galaxy was in good hands. Little did anyone know, however, that new challenges awaited beyond the horizon. The scars of the past ran deep, and while Kael'Vorn was gone, his influence lingered in the shadows. But whatever trials lay ahead, Ethan and Leora would face them together, as father and daughter, as guardians of peace, and as symbols of resilience in a fractured cosmos.